The energy inside the downtown martial arts center was electric, buzzing with anticipation as fans, fighters, and enthusiasts gathered for a day of demonstrations, interviews, and celebrity appearances. At the heart of the gathering stood Jaxon "Blitz" Cade, a rising MMA superstar whose record of brutal knockouts was matched only by his colossal ego and social media following. He was shirtless under a branded hoodie vest, flaunting a sculpted physique covered in tattoos, his hair styled with precision, and a GoPro rig strapped to a nearby cameraman who documented his every move. With each word he spoke, Jaxon commanded attention, throwing verbal jabs about how the new era of fighters had no room for washed-up Hollywood tough guys or outdated martial arts legends. "We're not doing movie punches anymore," he shouted to the crowd gathering near the sparring mats. "This is real, bone-snapping, blood-spilling, game-changing combat." His entourage, a mix of hype men, amateur vloggers, and aspiring fighters, cheered him on, their laughter loud and obnoxious. As Jaxon preened for the cameras, adjusting his sunglasses indoors, the doors at the far end of the gym opened. A moment of respectful silence swept across the room as Sylvester Stallone, the living embodiment of grit and cinematic combat, walked in quietly. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and boots, he exuded a presence that silenced the noise like a sudden wind snuffing out a flame. Though older, his frame still radiated strength, his jaw set firm, eyes scanning the room with seasoned awareness. The gym's organizer approached him with a smile, shaking his hand and pointing out the layout, unaware that storm clouds were already gathering. Jaxon, noticing the shift in the room's energy, turned to look and scoffed loudly. "No way," he muttered, then smirked. "They really dragged in Grandpa Rocky for this." His voice carried, loud enough for nearby spectators and phones to pick up. Stallone approached the viewing area near the sparring mat, nodding to fans, but keeping a low profile. That wasn't going to fly with Jaxon. Sensing an opportunity for clout and virality, he strutted towards Stallone, the cameraman trailing close, capturing every step. "Yo, Rocky," he called, drawing amused gasps. "You lost, or just trying to relive the glory days?" Stallone turned, calm and collected, locking eyes with the young fighter. "Just here to support the sport," he said evenly, "and maybe see some discipline in action." Jaxon smirked, sensing a challenge. "Discipline? That what you call rehearsed fight scenes?" He stepped in closer, towering slightly with youthful arrogance. "I'm not an actor, old man. I bleed for this." The room grew quieter as phones came out, recording the escalating exchange. "There's a big difference between being a fighter and playing one in a movie," Jaxon added, sneering. Stallone didn't flinch. "And there's a difference between being a champion and just being loud." The dig landed hard. Jackson's nostrils flared. "You want to step in the ring? Prove something? One round, no cameras cut away. Let's see how Rocky holds up against reality." Stallone shook his head. "I'm not here to fight anyone. I came to support, not to settle egos." Jaxon wasn't having it. He stepped closer, poking Stallone in the chest, his tone venomous. "Or maybe you're just scared. Scared the legend's faded. Scared you'll get wrecked by someone who doesn't need script." Murmurs turned to shocked gasps. Even Jackson's entourage looked uneasy. "You've got guts," Stallone said, stepping back, his voice cold steel. "But you've got no respect. And that's going to cost you, sooner than you think." Just then, as if on cue, the main gym doors creaked again, drawing everyone's attention. In walked Chuck Norris, quiet, composed, and radiating an energy that shifted the room like gravity. Dressed in a denim shirt and worn boots, he had the look of someone who didn't need to prove a thing, because he already had, many times over. Conversation stopped. Phones dropped. The crowd parted instinctively as Chuck made his way toward the confrontation. Stallone gave him a knowing nod. The kind men who'd fought the same wars in different ways exchanged without words. Jaxon, oblivious, muttered, "Who the hell's the cowboy?" A whisper rippled through the crowd. Chuck Norris. The martial artist. The legend. The man who trained champions long before Jaxon had even put on gloves. Chuck stopped a few feet from the scene, looking at Jaxon with an unreadable expression. "I heard there was a lot of noise in here," he said quietly, but with a voice that cut through the air like a blade. Jaxon turned, trying to size him up, still wearing his mocking grin. "You here to watch Rocky get schooled?" Chuck tilted his head slightly. "No, I'm here because this sport used to be about honor. And now I see a kid trying to build a name by tearing down the ones who built the road." The words hit like a slap. Jaxon took a step forward, still playing to the cameras. "You gonna give me a history lesson, Gramps? Or you here to back him up?" Chuck's face didn't change. "I don't back people up. I set them straight." The audience leaned in, sensing a confrontation that was shifting from spectacle to something real. Stallone stepped back, crossing his arms, letting Chuck take center stage. "You think you're tough?" Chuck asked, still calm. "Toughness isn't measured by your wins or your followers. It's measured by how you treat those who came before you." Jaxon snorted. "I treat people how they earn it." Chuck took another step forward, now just a breath away from him. "Then earn this," he said, pointing to the sparring mat. The crowd erupted as people pushed forward to get a better view. Phones shot into the air like a wave of modern torches. Jaxon hesitated for the first time, searching Chuck's eyes and finding no hesitation, only clarity. "You serious?" he asked, half laughing. "I don't want to break your hip, old man." Chuck didn't move, just gestured again to the mat. "No anger, no show, just you, me, and the rules. Let's see what you've got when no one's talking." The air was heavy with anticipation. Jaxon, caught between his own ego and the impossible task of backing down on camera, finally nodded. "Fine, let's go." He dropped his hoodie vest and marched toward the mat. Chuck walked calmly, unbothered, stretching his arms as he moved. The audience circled around in near silence, knowing something special, or catastrophic, was about to unfold. The sparring mat was cleared in record time, anticipation coursing through the gym like electricity before a storm, as Chuck Norris and Jaxon Blitz Cade squared off under the warm overhead lights. Though no official referee stood between them, the tension crackled with the silent understanding that what was about to happen would be more than a match. It was a lesson waiting to be taught. Jaxon bounced on the balls of his feet, fists twitching with restless energy, his smirk hiding the subtle doubt creeping into his thoughts. He had built his reputation on speed, aggression, and ruthless takedowns, but facing Chuck, he was up against something altogether different. Not just age, but presence, poise, and decades of mastery. Chuck merely adjusted his stance, one foot sliding slightly behind the other, his hands loose and low like a man entirely at peace in the eye of chaos. The moment the crowd stilled, Jaxon lunged, fast and sharp, throwing a vicious high kick meant to end the encounter in seconds. But Chuck shifted his weight with fluid grace, slipping the strike with inches to spare and countering with a light tap to the ribs that made Jaxon stumble, blinking. "Balance," Chuck said calmly. "It's the first to go when you let your ego lead." Jaxon gritted his teeth and surged forward again, throwing a combination. Jab, hook, spinning elbow, but Chuck ducked, sidestepped, and parried with elegant efficiency, each movement wasting nothing, each response echoing decades of refinement. The crowd was silent except for gasps and the scuffle of feet on the mat. Stallone, arms crossed just outside the ring, watched with quiet approval, his face unreadable, but his eyes locked onto every movement. Jackson's frustration grew with each passing second. He was used to overpowering opponents, not chasing shadows. He threw a low leg kick, trying to chop down the older man, but Chuck caught it midair and twisted subtly, sending Jaxon tumbling to the mat. There was no applause, just stunned silence. Jaxon sprang up quickly, red-faced, and breathing harder than he wanted to admit. "You trying to humiliate me?" he spat. Chuck didn't flinch. "No," he said. "You've already done that part." The line hit like a gut punch, and even the audience winced as the young fighter surged forward with rage replacing strategy. He faked left, pivoted hard right, and came in with a brutal elbow aimed at Chuck's temple. But Chuck's hand moved like lightning, redirecting the strike and planting a palm gently against Jackson's chest, stopping him cold. "Too much force," Chuck murmured. "Not enough control." Jaxon broke the pause by shoving back, clearly out of his depth, but unwilling to quit. He backed up, paced, then rushed with a flying knee, It was powerful, wild, and perfectly timed, except Chuck stepped aside like water flowing around a rock, letting Jaxon crash awkwardly to the floor again. The gym seemed to hold its collective breath. A younger fighter from Jackson's crew tried to yell something, but the silence around him swallowed his voice. Chuck offered a hand to help Jaxon up, but the pride in the young man wouldn't allow him to take it. He rose, fists clenched, cheeks flushed with humiliation, and screamed, "You're just lucky you're not 20 years younger." Chuck smiled, the kind of smile carved by experience and not triumph. "If I were 20 years younger," he said softly, "you'd be in the hospital." The crowd erupted at last, not in laughter but in awe. The older man hadn't just held his own. He had dismantled a fighter in his prime, using nothing but patience, technique, and composure. Jackson's face contorted with disbelief as he tried to charge one final time, fury replacing form. But Chuck finally moved in close, stepped inside the chaos, and wrapped him in a seamless, ancient joint lock that brought Jaxon to his knees with a gasp. "Fighting isn't just about power," Chuck whispered, barely audible to anyone but Jaxon. "It's about knowing when not to fight." And with that, he released him and stepped back, turning his back on Jaxon without fear. The fight was over. There had been no knockouts, no blood, no shouting. Only the quiet devastation of a man shown the mirror of his own ignorance. Jaxon sat there for a moment, head bowed, his breath ragged. His crew didn't move. His followers didn't film. In that moment, every ounce of bravado he had built dissolved under the weight of what he'd just experienced. Chuck walked off the mat and rejoined Stallone, who gave him a simple nod of approval. No high fives, no victory speech, just the acknowledgement of two warriors who had been there and done it all. Jaxon slowly rose to his feet, humbled but clearly wrestling with the inner storm of ego and lesson. Chuck turned once more, looking him in the eyes. "Real strength," he said, "isn't measured in what you can take. It's measured in what you can learn." The words hit harder than any punch. The audience, recognizing the moment for what it was, finally broke into respectful applause. Not for the spectacle, but for the values being restored right in front of them. Jaxon gave a curt nod and left the mat, his steps slower, heavier, but perhaps more grounded than ever before. His entourage didn't speak as they followed. The cameras kept rolling, but the narrative had changed. This wasn't a takedown anymore. It was a transformation in progress. Stallone looked out across the room, nodding at the younger fighters watching, absorbing what had just happened. He leaned toward Chuck and said, "They'll remember this more than any film we ever made." Chuck simply replied, "Good." That was the point. The moment had transcended entertainment and stepped in a legacy, a reminder that behind every punch thrown and every mat stained with sweat was a code, a culture, a discipline passed down through generations. Jaxon had stepped in looking for a headline, a viral clip, and dominance, and instead walked away with something far more valuable: humility. As the crowd dispersed, conversations buzzed about what they'd witnessed, and many younger fighters approached Chuck and Stallone, asking questions with new reverence in their voices. The gym, once a stage for ego, had become a classroom for respect. Jaxon didn't leave right away. He sat alone in the back corner of the gym, towel draped over his shoulders, not hiding but not speaking either, just staring at the mat where everything changed. And for the first time, he wasn't thinking about followers, likes, or pay-per-view numbers. He was thinking about discipline, legacy, and how little he truly understood about either one. Chuck had not beaten him with force, but with the kind of truth that cuts deeper than any strike. And in doing so, he planted a seed of something rare in the world of brash competition: growth. In the hours following the sparring match, the atmosphere in the gym shifted from charged to contemplative, as if everyone had collectively witnessed not just a physical confrontation, but a passing of wisdom too powerful to ignore. Jaxon Cade, who had come in as a brash, loud-mouthed MMA star looking to humiliate legends, now sat on a bench against the far wall, drenched in silence and sweat, his eyes no longer scanning for cameras, but staring blankly at the mat where his ego had crumbled. The crowd had mostly dispersed, leaving behind a quieter group of onlookers, coaches, martial arts veterans, and a few younger fighters who approached Stallone and Chuck Norris for handshakes, advice, or just a chance to be near men who had just reinforced what the martial arts world was supposed to stand for. Stallone leaned against a column, arms crossed, watching Jaxon with a faint look of curiosity. Not mockery or pity, but interest, like a man who'd seen 100 cocky kids break, but only a few put themselves back together. Chuck, meanwhile, had resumed quiet conversation with a young Taekwondo student, demonstrating a subtle movement with his hands that had zero flash and infinite precision. The lesson was never about domination. It was always about discipline. And now, all eyes turned once more as Jaxon slowly stood and walked toward them. This time with no cameras, no entourage, no bravado, just the heavy weight of realization pulling at his shoulders. The gym seemed to pause as he approached Chuck and Stallone, the space around them clearing like the eye of a storm. Jaxon stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from humility, the kind that's almost painful when you've never practiced it. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke, and everyone nearby leaned in to hear. "I came here thinking I was going to embarrass you both," he said quietly, "but I was the one who didn't know a damn thing." Chuck looked him in the eye, his expression calm but focused. "You know it now," he replied. "That's what matters." Jaxon nodded, eyes darting between the two men. "I've trained for a long time. I've won fights, made money, built a brand, but I forgot, or maybe I never understood what fighting really was." Stallone stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that meant far more than applause or likes. "Fighting's not about breaking someone down," he said. "It's about building yourself up and helping others do the same." Jaxon swallowed hard, visibly moved. "I want to do better," he said. "Not just in the ring, with everything. I don't want to be remembered as the guy who tried to go viral by tearing down legends. I want to be someone who earns the respect I was too proud to give." Chuck nodded slowly. "That choice is yours. And if you're serious, you start by doing the hard work in silence, not on camera." Then he added, "But you've got to live it every day. It's not a one-time apology. It's a way of life." Jaxon lowered his head, then raised it with a kind of fire that hadn't been there before. Not rage or arrogance, but purpose. "Teach me," he said. The words hung in the air like a promise. Chuck looked over at Stallone, who smiled knowingly. "Then let's get to work," Chuck replied. And with that, the transformation truly began. Over the next few weeks, the story of the confrontation went viral, but not in the way Jaxon had originally intended. Clips of Chuck's effortless control, Stallone's quiet authority, and Jackson's eventual humility swept across social media, not as mockery, but as a rare moment of real honor breaking through the noise of modern martial arts hype. MMA forums debated it. Fighters shared it. Parents showed it to their kids. Even gyms began posting signs that read, "Train like Chuck, respect like Sly, learn like Jaxon." Jaxon himself disappeared from social media for a while. No posts, no stories, no call-outs, just silence. And when he reemerged, it wasn't with bravado or flashy edits, but a quiet video of him bowing to his new coach, Chuck Norris, and beginning training anew under a more traditional, disciplined regimen. He started attending seminars not as a guest of honor, but as a student, taking notes, listening, and sparring without ego. Stallone, impressed by the shift, invited him to train together occasionally, using their time not for press opportunities, but for genuine conversation. The three men became an unlikely triad: the wise elder, Chuck, the seasoned warrior, Stallone, and the reformed prodigy, Jaxon, appearing at conferences and charity events not to showcase dominance, but to advocate for humility in combat sports. When asked in an interview what changed him, Jaxon didn't hesitate. "Getting humbled by Chuck was the best thing that ever happened to me," he said. "I thought I understood power. I didn't. Now I understand discipline. And I'm not done learning." Eventually, Jaxon returned to competition, not with fury, but with focus. He walked into the cage not to prove something to the world, but to test himself. And his fighting changed, not just in style, but in substance. He was less reckless, more patient, and more respectful, always bowing to opponents before and after the match, always shaking the hands of trainers, always taking time to thank the crowd. His record improved, but more importantly, his reputation transformed. Fighters who once called him arrogant now called him disciplined. Commentators who once dismissed him as a social media brawler now praised his technique and control. And behind every success, Chuck's quiet influence was visible, not through shouting or spectacle, but through presence. Years later, when Jaxon retired, he opened a gym not with his name on the front, but simply called Legacy. Inside, quotes from Chuck and Stallone lined the walls, and students of all ages trained under the motto, "Power is nothing without respect." Chuck, now in his 80s, occasionally stopped by, still quick on his feet and sharper than ever. Stallone, though more selective with appearances, remained a supporter, often surprising students with pep talks or training stories. And Jaxon? He became the coach he never had, the kind that pulled hot-headed teenagers aside and said, "You're not here to impress. You're here to improve." His story, the one that started with an attempt to humiliate a legend, ended with him becoming something greater than just a fighter, a man who understood the full spectrum of what it means to be a warrior. And in gyms across the country, new fighters told the tale not with laughter, but with reverence. Remember when that MMA guy went after Stallone and Chuck? They'd say, "He got wrecked, but then he got better, way better." And that, above all, was the legacy left behind. Not one of shame or pain or ego, but of growth, of humility earned the hard way, of a cocky fighter who thought he knew it all, until Chuck Norris walked in and shut him down so he could finally stand up.